Hey guys, it's Kaylee, welcome back to my channel. Today I am back again for another weekly reading wrap up. I can't quite believe that it is Friday already, but here we are. I know I've got some new faces joining me today, so thank you so much if you did come over from Mercedes' channel. I really appreciate Mercedes giving me a shout out. It means so much, especially coming from her, because I have been watching her channel for years. And thank you so much for subscribing. It really means a lot to me, and I hope that we can have some fun discussions about books. So this week I managed to read 3 books and got almost to the end of a 4th book, so I'm going to be talking about those 4 books today. So the first book that I finished this week was definitely my favourite, and that is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. So I mentioned this book in my last wrap-up video, and I mentioned that it was a little bit slow going for me to begin with. And it definitely was. Like, it took me a little bit to get into this book, but once I was into it, it completely had me. So this is a family saga and it follows an Indian Muslim family who live in America. So we follow Hadia, Huda and Amar, who are the 3 siblings, and their parents. And the book touches on quite a lot of big social issues. So it looks at what it's like being a 2nd generation immigrant. It looks at racism, class differences and religion. And while all of these things are in the book, really the book is about the intimate moments, so all of the small interactions between the characters and how those bigger issues affect each of the members of this family. So the book opens up on present day and we are at the wedding of Hadia, who is the eldest of the 3 children. And Amar, her younger brother, has been reunited with the family after being estranged for 3 years. So in this opening scene, there's definitely an element of like misunderstanding and guilt between a lot of the characters, and although we are hearing from each of the characters' perspectives and they're living in the moment, they're constantly just thinking about where each of the other characters are and what they're thinking. So then the book goes back in time and we see sections from their childhood and their past. So we see from each of the different characters' perspective, and it's written in 3rd person, but we do hear from each of the characters and what their thoughts and feelings are and what their perceptions of each other are. And I found that really interesting because it's that way where you see each character from a variety of different angles. So we could get the perspective of the mother, for example, from Hadia and from Amar's perspective, and their perspectives are so different. So someone could say something about one of the characters and then literally on the next page it could be contradicted. So I just found that really fascinating. The only thing about the book probably that I didn't like or didn't understand was that we don't get anything from Huda's perspective. So Huda is the middle child. I feel like we probably could have heard more from Huda, and it would have been interesting to have heard from her perspective how she viewed both of her siblings and her parents. But from what she added to the book, I think she probably could have been removed and it wouldn't have made much of a difference. I really loved reading about Hadia and Amar's relationship. I just thought it was absolutely fascinating and heartbreaking at times, and again hearing from each of their perspectives about each other was just so interesting. Like, Amar really loved and looked up to his elder sister when they were really young, and he was really attached to her and he wouldn't want to go anywhere without her. And then later on in the novel, when they're teenagers, Hadia kind of thinks like, oh, Amar doesn't really care anymore, like he doesn't love me the way that he used to, like he's a teenage boy now, like he doesn't really care. And then when we hear from Amar's perspective, there's a sentence in the book that he said that really just broke my heart. I think he said, home is not home without Hadia in it. And it just literally broke my heart, because it's that way that members of a family, we don't always say what's on our mind and a lot goes unsaid, and it's that frustrating thing of if these people actually said what they felt, maybe the conflict wouldn't be quite so bad, but it's easier said than done. So as the novel continues, this past section leads up to the present day and we come back to the wedding scene. So we're bringing all of our newfound knowledge of their past and the intricacies between these family members into the present day scenario again. And then we also get a section at the very end of the novel that's a lot more retrospective. So it's from one of the characters' perspectives, looking back at the events that we've just read and kind of reflecting on it. I thought that the structure and the writing of this book worked so well for me. The pacing was just really well done, and every time we got a detail or an emotion, I think it just worked really well. And despite the beginning of the book being slow, I think that almost helped because it forced me to actually slow down my reading. You know, sometimes I can rush through a book and read it in a day if I really want to, but because I found it slower paced and I wasn't rushing through that first section, it forced me to slow down and really take in each individual scene and each individual moment so that I really was spending the time with the characters that I needed to spend. Mirza's writing was also really beautiful. Like, it's quite lyrical and literary, but it's not overwrought at any point, so I didn't find it overwritten, and there were some passages that were really beautiful, but they were quite simple, so I really enjoyed her writing. And I spoke at the beginning about some of the larger issues that the book speaks about, and one of those is religion. So the family is a Muslim family, and you know, the parents have moved from India and their children have been born and brought up in America. So there is this overarching theme of how the children view their own identity in terms of their faith and how each of them individually accepts the Muslim faith in the life that they live now in America, surrounded by people of so many different cultures and backgrounds and religions. And I found that was really interesting, especially across the genders as well. So seeing it from Hadia's perspective and from Amar's perspective. And Amar definitely is the one that struggles with his religion the most, and we see that journey throughout the book. And he definitely feels like an outsider in his own home, which was really, really hard to read about. So overall, this book really is just about the people that we come to know and come to love, and I do genuinely feel like I know these characters now. I genuinely have not stopped thinking about this book since I finished it at the beginning of the week, and initially I gave it 4 stars because I thought, you know, those gripes I had with Huda's character and the slow pace, I was like, oh, it's not a 5-star read for me. But actually, having sort of sat with it for a few days, I do really, really love this book, and I have bumped up to a 5-star read. So yeah, definitely one to pick up if you haven't already. If you love family dynamics, if you like a character study, and you like simple but beautiful writing, definitely give this one a go. So the next book that I finished this week was a young adult pick, and that was Blood Promise by Rochelle Mead. So this is the 4th book in the Vampire Academy series. Yeah, I got that right. And this one definitely is my favourite so far. So this one has a slightly different setup to the other books because Rose, our main character, is actually separated from the rest of her usual group of people because she is out on a journey. So we kind of get a different dynamic in this book because Rose is on her own, and then when we do see other characters, they're together but without Rose. And you know, she is number one the protagonist of the story, but she's also that character who's really loud and outgoing. She's the one in the friend group that steals all of the attention. So it was just really interesting to see the dynamic of all of her friends back at the academy without Rose there and how that worked. And of course this book has its inevitable flaws. So for me, some of the characters do come off a little bit like caricatures of themselves, like an exaggerated version, and like their personality traits only seem to exist in extremes. Some of the dialogue was a little bit cringy and maybe not the most believable, like they don't talk in the most realistic way. And then there's elements to the plot, like towards the end of the storyline, that were a little bit predictable. But to be honest, I kind of just gloss over the things that I don't like because these are just such enjoyable reads. And again, I read for character, and there was just a lot of character development in this book. This one is just a lot more introspective, so obviously we're in Rose's head again, and because she is on her own on this journey, we just see a lot of her reflecting on the events of the previous books, and looking back, like I said, at what's going on at the academy, and the relationship between Lissa and some of the other people. And then we also get Rose really reflecting on her romantic relationships as well. And I won't spoil anything, but it was just really interesting to see that while she was isolated and without any sort of outside influence. I just thought that that was a really interesting technique to use in this book. I also really liked the extra elements of the magical world that we get. So I think Rochelle Mead does that really well in this series, is that we get sort of like a little nugget of new world building in each book. This has just been a really interesting way and a really buildable way of expanding the world that she's creating. So in this book, we're introduced to the alchemists, which is a profession for humans in which they basically help dispose of the strigoi bodies in the real world, because obviously you can't be leaving a bunch of like dead vampire bodies lying around everywhere. And this was just really fascinating to me, and part of me was thinking like, oh, I kind of wish that we'd had more of that in the book. Like, it's not really in there a lot, and I really found that fascinating. But then I realised that the spin-off series to this, I think the first book called Bloodlines, which I knew about, but I wasn't necessarily like, I'm going to read that series. I think that series is actually about the character Sydney that we meet in this book, who is an alchemist. So I'm really actually quite excited to pick that up, because I do feel like that is an element that I would love to explore more, and it was just really fascinating. And Sydney was such a great character as well. Like, I really liked seeing her. Like, she was different from all of the other characters we've seen before, and obviously she's a human, so it was quite nice to see that too. And I loved seeing her and Rose build a friendship almost, and a relationship together, and to see them bounce off of each other. It was just really nice to have a different character dynamic in there. So overall, I just felt like this book, similar to what I said about Catching Fire last week, I think it just had a really good balance of the character development and the action that I really look for in like a young adult fantasy. And I thought that it was just done really well in this book. So really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars, and I am looking forward to jumping into the next book in June. So then the third book that I have to speak about today is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. So this book I have seen everywhere on BookTube for the last couple of years, and this one was actually on my Goodreads Want to Read project that I spoke about in my last video for May. So I have had this one on my shelf, or I've been interested in reading it since 2018, so 2 years ago. And this one was such a weird one. It's going to be so difficult for me to actually talk about, because I have never been so back and forth in my feelings for a book. In my notes, like I take notes on my phone as I'm reading, and literally like I've said something from like the first chapter, and then halfway through the book I've said something that completely contradicts what I felt at the beginning, and it was so frustrating when I was reading it, and it made it really hard to give a star rating at the end as well. So this is a literary novel, and it is set in the marshlands of the North Carolina coast, and we follow a girl named Kaya who we see from quite a young age, and we see her grow up. So it's kind of like a coming of age story. So I do like that. So Kaya, we see her at the very beginning of the novel. I think she's like 6 or 7 years old, and her mother packs her bags one day and leaves, and she doesn't return. And so this abandonment kind of haunts Kaya, and it just seems to happen again and again. So slowly her, I think 4 or 5 siblings end up leaving the house, and she is left on her own as like a 7-year-old girl with her abusive alcoholic father. And Kaya was such an amazing character. Like, she was really independent and innovative, but yet she had like a really vulnerable, sensitive side to her as well. So I think she was a really well drawn character, and she was really interesting to read about. So the family, or what's left of the family, live in this sort of rundown, dilapidated shack in the marshlands, and they're kind of ostracised from the nearby community of Barkley Cove, the village that's nearby. The villagers don't really speak to them, they don't like them, they're kind of, you know, they're thought of as like marsh scum. People don't like them because they're really poor. And when Kaya is only 7 years old, all of her family have left. She basically has to just learn to fend for herself. So she's cooking for herself, she is keeping the house, she's going out and buying supplies, and she kind of relies on her dad bringing this money in every week, and he's not reliable at all. So eventually he stops bringing this money, and she has to learn how to make money herself. And again, she's like 7 years old, so she is really smart, and she decides she's going to dig up mussels and sell the mussels. And then when that kind of doesn't really work enough, she starts to smoke fish, and she sells them at this nearby little like stall thing further down the river, where there's an old guy called Jumpin', who again is kind of an outsider from the town. So as Kaya is growing up, she soon befriends a young boy who appears on the marsh as well, and they have like a cute little relationship where they leave feathers and things for each other, and so they clearly both have a good understanding of wildlife and marsh life. And Kaya starts to build a collection of feathers and shells and whatnot. And so her and Tate build a really nice friendship, and they learn about the marsh together and the ecosystems. There's a lot of nature writing in this book, and Tate actually teaches Kaya how to read. So over the course of the book, Kaya is basically forced to confront her abandonment and learn to trust people, and she kind of builds tentative friendships. So we also have a timeline alongside this one, a few years in the future, where Kaya is in her 20s, I think. And this basically follows the death of a young man in the community called Chase. He is like your super popular jock from school guy everybody loves, but secretly he's, you know, a bit of a dick, and he is found dead on the beach. So obviously, inevitably, the town's prejudice towards Kaya kind of points fingers at her, and the police end up looking into Kaya as a suspect. So like I said, the book is written in a very descriptive style, and there's a lot of descriptions of the natural world and the wildlife and the landscape, the marsh landscape, and I love that sort of thing. I love nature writing, and I loved it in the beginning, and that was one of the things I put in my notes. But then throughout the book it kind of just felt a little bit overdone, and the best way that I can describe it is that I really just felt Delia Owen's presence in the book. So on every page it was like I could really sense that she was there, she was writing the book, and that these characters were fictional characters that I was reading about rather than these are real people. I also found that there were some sections that were kind of like telling and not showing. So there's one example of this that I wrote down, and basically there was a section where Kaya is telling the story of a turkey hen. So she's describing this turkey hen, and that when this turkey hen is injured and it is lying on the ground about to die, so that it doesn't attract predators, the flock, so its own flock, will attack and kill this turkey hen. So it's like kicking it while it's down, basically. And so it tells this little story about the turkey hen, and then straight away goes into a scene where Kaya is in her shack at home, and all of the children from the community are attacking her, and they're teasing her. I think they're throwing things at her and taunting her, and obviously this is tying these two images together in your mind, you know, like Kaya is the turkey hen in this situation. So we get that, I understood that, and it was actually, you know, it was really good. But then there's just this lone sentence, and I've got it written down. It said, "Every smack a stab in the turkey hen's heart." And like, I don't know, for me this was just too, like, it's just too much. I think it's like driving a message home, and I prefer a little bit more nuance. Like, I like the author to trust the reader and to know that we would have got that connection without that really obvious sentence being put in there to make us understand it. Does that make sense? And then in terms of the plot itself, like, I think you have to just suspend a little bit of disbelief for this book, because I did find it quite hard to believe that no one in the community would intervene with Kaya. Like, she's under the age of 10 and she's essentially living by herself. She goes to school for one day and doesn't return, and like there's I don't know if it was like a social worker or somebody did come to the house once, but then nothing ever happened. So I think it just wasn't the most believable, but definitely what happens in the plot later on in the book saved it for me. There was just so much suspense and intrigue with the later storyline, the sort of murder mystery part of the story, and it was just really interesting sort of trying to tie the threads of all the different characters together. And I actually really enjoyed the like police detective and the like courtroom scenes at the end. I really, really loved that part of the book. So I found like the climax, like the last sort of 100 pages of the book, were super compelling, and I read them super quickly. They were really exciting, and I raced through them. So it kind of saved it for me at the end. And I thought because it was so plot heavy towards the end, the things that were frustrating me about the writing either stopped happening or I just didn't notice them because I was so invested in the story. There was a really small section like right at the end of the book that didn't quite work for me, but overall I was really satisfied with the way that the book ended, and my overall sort of feelings at the end of the book was just a feeling of satisfaction and like that was an enjoyable read. So like I say, I really struggled to rate this one, but I think when I finished it initially I gave it 4 stars, but then on reflection I've dropped that down to a 3 star. But I did still really enjoy it. Like if some of the things I've said you think wouldn't bother you, then definitely give it a go. There were definitely some really nice passages in the book, and I really loved Kaya as a character, so would still definitely recommend this one. So those are all of the books that I finished this week, but I am almost finished a 4th. I thought I would have it finished by the time I was filming this video, but so close. So that is Gin Patrol on the Purple Line by Deepa Anapara. So this one again has kind of been, I don't want to say a disappointment, but it kind of has been. So I started this book, when was it? Yesterday, I think, and I read like the first 100 pages, and I kind of was like, oh, I've read like a third of the book already and I'm not totally invested. So if you don't know, this one, it was on the Women's Prize long list, which is why I picked it up. And this is set in, I think, an unnamed town in India, and we're following a group of children. So our main character is a little boy called Jai, and basically in this town, one of his schoolmates goes missing. And so Jai he's really into detective programs and like police programs on TV, and so for him this is kind of like a little game, and him and his friends decide that they're gonna search for clues and try and solve this mystery of this missing boy. But obviously, as is with a lot of books written from children's perspectives, there's a lot sort of hidden between the lines that as an adult reading the book you kind of see things that Jai doesn't see, and you kind of understand the reality of actually what's happening. And over the course of the book several other children start to go missing as well, so the plot sort of thickens. I'm at the stage now where I'm, I think, about 100 pages from the end, so I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book. I would say that right now not much more's happened. Like the stories just keeps kind of going round and round in circles, and we keep getting like descriptions of what happens to the children. We get little chapters of what happens to the children who are disappearing, so you kind of get an insight of what's happened. And then we're just still getting this description from Jai and his friends about what they're doing to try and solve the mystery. So it's fun and it's enjoyable and it's quite charming, but it's just not really doing anything groundbreaking for me. And there was the moment when I finished that first 100 pages where I kind of thought like I could have DNF'd this and I probably wouldn't have like minded or cared, which sounds really bad, but I did persevere because I bought it in hardcover, which is a really bad reason to persevere, but I have persevered and I've got about 100 pages left, like I said, so I will probably finish this today, but to be honest it's probably not going to be more than a 3-star read, which is really, it's a shame, but it is what it is, I guess. So that is my week of reading wrapped up for you. My plans for the next few days, I have 2 more books left from my May TBR to pick up, which I don't know if I will get to both of them because I've only got the weekend, but you never know, the weekend's always good for reading. So I have There by Tommy Orange and The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox by Maggie O'Farrell. So these are the 2 that I'm hoping to pick up over the next couple of days. I also have one on my Kindle actually, which I forgot about, but it is A Decent Family by Rosa Ventrella, and this is translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein. So I got this from the Amazon First Reads thing, so I think it's published by Amazon Publishing on the 1st of June, and I got an early copy of it on my Kindle, so I should read that too. So those actually are the 3 that I have left to read in the next 2 days. So fingers crossed, wish me luck. Hopefully I'll enjoy some of these books more than those 2. It's always a bit of a shame, isn't it, when you get 3-star reads, because it's not like you hated it and you have like a passion on that side of the spectrum, but it's just kind of like, yeah, they were okay. So it's a bit of a shame. But I'm super glad I read A Place for Us. That is the highlight. Let's just remember A Place for Us this week was the standout. If you have read any of these books as well and you want to chat to me about them, I would love to have a conversation down in the comments. I'd really like to see what you guys thought of these books that I've read. And let me know what you're reading this weekend. I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!